Thank you very much. Just listening carefully. You were saying something like you were talking about somebody else. This is really a nice experience for me to be back here in Asia. I was asked by a friend if I was somehow connected with this institution. I said yes, I stopped by for some time. During the time the Senate was starting this, Dr. Nina, and it was my self-appointed task to look for the guys who could be recruited into helping us in Federation of Farmers at the time, starting with Carlito Gaspar, and I remember Ms. Nobal from Cebu, where we are now, and Lito joined priesthood. And Ulot Gerlach, who made a mistake of saying yes to us, and I brought him to Davao down there in Malaysia, and he did his master's there on Noyopok. Well, yesterday I was in Muñoz, the Field Rice Institute, and the head of that institute of scientists, about 100 of them, the government of the Republic is spending billions of pesos on to improve rice hybrids. Was in a man named Dr. Don Rasco, familiar name. And so he gave his spiel, and during lunch, before my talk in the afternoon, he told me, yeah, it's already Avila. You know, very familiar name because you may be related to this guy. He was my teacher with the Los Baños. He was the one who set us on fire and helped me to gain the chairmanship of the student council after Cochimaes. And I said, yeah, before we did that. I said, yeah, how did you know that? I said, I remember it. And not only did he help you, I said, but you helped him because you organized the march of the students of Los Baños should be in support of the Avila circle demonstrations in August to October 1969. Is that right? And he was I guess he must have been reading these things. But how are you related? You must be his son. I said, yeah, I am his son. And I'm sorry not to be son, I'm sorry not to. He had completely forgot. He would not believe that they were the same persons. And he's younger than me. And he's the head of the Theology Institute. This happened yesterday. He was so flabbergasted that in his speech, in the afternoon, he kept talking about this unbelievable incident. But yes, I am here to, first of all, dispel all rumors which are celebrated that I died a long time ago. They thought so when they were organizing the Congress. My classmate, Claudio Delesma, who later said, if we had only known that you were around, we would have invited you. Because what do you think? Where was I? I was in the papers open as having died already during the time of Marcos. Enough of that. My assignment today is nothing that is a call to action, not anything of the sort for which I am usually known, but simply academic churches toward a philosophy and theology of ownership. Believe it or not, most of us activists of the 60s and 70s made it a point of achieving excellence in religion because that was the issue at the time, that people who would be studying would forget excellence in studies if they got involved in activism. If I went to Yunyan and stayed weeks in Malabang, near the Lawak, and organized the Pag-iitig, I had to make sure I was stuck in my class when I went back to philosophy and theology. In this country, for quite a while now, big customer to discuss the public ownership, not exclusively in legal terms, but in profounder meanings of moral and philosophical nuances. It is a good approach because even in courts of law that ostensibly consider only the legal aspects of a given topic, it is actually philosophy that propels legal minds to finally decide crucial issues. The late Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo, that made a famous statement, he said, implicit in every decision where the question is what is legal at large is the philosophy of the origin and aim of law. A philosophy which, however veiled, is in truth the final arbiter. It accepts one set of arguments, modifies another, rejects a third, standing ever serve as a court of ultimate appeal. Neither lawyer nor judge, pressing forward along one line or retreating along another, is conscious at all times that it is philosophy which is impelling him to the front court of the rear. And in the Supreme Court of this country, that philosophy was never clear when it came to land ownership. That's why it would take a long time. Not only because there were millions of officials for taking their time, but because even if they did want to, they would never be very clear on what is the philosophy of ownership and land ownership that this community subscribes to. So I thought that we should ask that question. What was the philosophy of, or functional worldview of the people of the Philippines during the pre-colonial era? What religious cultural values regarding being and having the outward sustenance as much spiritual as physical? The barangay or kinship system in which everything was as much a branch of being as everything else. The immediate surroundings, the rivers and seas and the valley or mountain that form the center of their universe. The common deep yearning of animists is for a simple, cosmically harmonious life, katamtamang pamumuhay, including a great capacity of responding to people of things alive with reverence and full attention, rather than with instrumentalist design. Looking at a leaf, a wave, a cloud, a gorgeous sunset with the eyes of a child, the ancient animists found themselves looking at something inexhaustibly singular. Suddenly the world became mahiwaga, that is overridingly mysterious, with dimensions beyond dimensions revealed in it, and with nothing too routine or too ordinary to escape wonderment. The world was alive and charged with grandeur, according to the animist's point of view. The banana plant was not a mere static entity. The banana plant actively banana. The cows, cow. The water, ocean. The universe, people. All being was an act of being. Everyone and everything was fruit of the earth and one with the world. The animists adverted every being as to one alive, as to thou, and not it. And were not willing to think of this thou as merely the sum of all things, but rather in some mysterious way more than all these things together. Thus, they adored and loved mystery present, whom they eventually called Bakalang Maikabal. In the awareness of mystery present, they looked at each other more realistically as being necessarily linked in being and mutual need, and essentially oriented for deeper communion. In their first recognition, this Filipino word we have, sama, common significance we know hundreds of millions in the Indo-Malay Polynesian cultures, refers to the communion values of highly in these cultures. It refers to the recognition that the human being is not only an individual but a member of a historical race. Pagsasama-sama, being together, was natural. Humans live in community as their natural habitat. Be this community a tribe, a family, a neighborhood, a commune, or a kinship group, the ancient Filipinos called this basic community the barangay or barangay. It was an environment that persons learned all their skills, economic, political, moral, intellectual, and personal. Human freedom itself was social and not merely personal achievement. This state of pagsasama-sama, a state of connectedness to everyone, led to the active magtulungan or mutual assistance patterns of work. The agrarian pyramids in northern Philippines are living monuments to thousands of years of mutual aid achievement by a people who treated the world around them with discerning reverence. The historian De La Costa pointed out way back in the 60s, one of the worst things you can say about the Filipino is that wala siyang pakikisama. This is the charge that one has no sense of partnership. Ostracism becomes the lot of such a person who acts like one who has resigned from the human race. The interesting part of the pakikisama or communion principle was that it fostered and presupposed another great religious cultural value, namely the value of pagsasarili, which referred to the capacity to own oneself. Again, De La Costa noted, when Magellan and his men called on the people of Afghan to stop owning themselves, what answer did Lapu-Lapu send back? This, that if the Spaniards had lances made of metal, the people of Mactan had lances made of wood with tips hardened in the fire. Just that. Being community did not imply being dominated, but rather being Malaya, free. And freedom was both a gift and an achievement. The barangay worked together to preserve and nurture kalayaan, freedom. In the depths of their consciousness, the people of the Philippines regarded each other as kasama, partners in a common journey. They provided for each other not merely in life, but also in death and dying. As evidenced by the northern Luzon mummies, which were found with provisions afforded them by the community they were about to leave behind. So in general, that was the philosophy, theology, pre-colonial Filipinos. To the concept of ownership, among social scientists, it has become practically action that the stability or instability of a given society primarily depends on the concept of property which that society entertains, accepts, and practices. They know that prosperity of being depends quite a lot on the justice of having. Conflicts across the wide spectrum ranging from family squabbles, neighborhood quarrels, to world wars, all have to do with the same thing. What is just or unjust regarding ownership? Regarding what is mine or yours or his or hers or theirs or ours. In other words, regarding the justice of having. An ancient tribe living in the rainforest of Southeast Asia, whom anthropologists and ethnologists consider the oldest human tribe in existence, was reported to have a remarkably limited vocabulary. For instance, while they had a word for love, they had none for hatred or war. But neither did they have a word for property. Interesting enough. And yet, among historical peoples worldwide, the concept of ownership of property has always been present. People knew what to call mine or yours or his or hers or theirs or ours. How did this come about? We can say for sure when. It seems that once human beings began to produce their means of subsistence, they immediately began to have the concept of ownership, to call things mine, yours, his, hers, theirs, or ours, corresponding to the way they divided among themselves their labor necessary to produce wealth or whatever was required to sustain life, food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities. capacity to produce certain tools and ornaments that enable human consciousness to develop regarding one's right to oneself and the use of one's faculties. Before long, the corollary right will be obvious. One has a right to the enjoyment of the fruits of one's own exertions. One has a right to the produce arising from the exercise of one's own faculties. If I have my own, and I little power belongs to me, then what I make is mine. If the objects around me belong to me as my own, it is either because I made them or because the one who made them transferred them to me. In the latter case, here they are as a gift from his or her own hands, or indirectly from the hands of others in various places and times. At all events, the labor or exertion of individual human beings gave them in their mind the right to own the products of their labor. But there was an interesting corollary to this ethical basis of individual right. I refer to the early idea among most peoples, including our pre-colonial forebears, that, listen to this carefully, precisely in order to safeguard the individual's right to his or her own exertion, no one ought to monopolize things that no one had made. Let the commons stay common for all and never be arrogated by one or a few. Go together, right? According to this early Filipino philosophy, things that are just there due to no one's effort, merit, or origination, as for example the things of nature's bounty or the natural elements of production like land, water, and other similar resources, these could not be justly monopolized by anyone. Did you create the land? Did you make the air or the water? These things are just there in common for all. The development of agriculture could have necessitated the recognition of the individual right to own land, on the justification that one had to secure for oneself the exclusive enjoyment of the results of cultivation. Nonetheless, the ethical view continued to prevail among early communities that land, reflecting all of nature's bounty, should be held in common for the use of all. The right of the tiller to the fruits of his or her toil is fine, but the right does not extend to monopolizing the land from which and on which all must live. If early society allowed you to a mere exclusive use of the land because of your development efforts on it, and because of its abundance, and fewer people as yet demanding it, this ownership right was nonetheless temporary and limited, not permanent and absolute. Every 7 years, as in the Mosaic law, 7, 50, or 70 years, as traditions went, land had to be given rest. And society had to review who got to use what and how much, depending again on good stewardship of what belonged to all for the benefit of all, but starting always with the one who made the land productive. The people of the Philippines were quite sophisticated on the ownership of property. For instance, they had two distinct terms for owning anything as ours. The Spaniards said, "Nuestro." The English people said, "ours." But the people of the Philippines could use the term "anim," meaning exclusively ours. And refer, for example, to village lands as collectively belonging to the given village to the exclusion of others. Or one could use the term "atin," meaning ours in an inclusive sense. comprehensive with everyone, both within and without that particular village or barangay. That some lands were ours exclusively because we applied exclusive labor for the productivity of those lands, while rivers and forests were ours inclusively because they were just there as nature's gift to all for the enjoyment of all. The people of the Philippines, like most other peoples on earth, knew the important implications of the patent truth that the human being is quite inescapably a land animal. Without land, the human being simply cannot live. All that one consumes, and every condition of one's being, even if you go to the moon, is ultimately referable to land. Mere space in which the extended person's being involves the occupation of land. The appropriation by some individuals of the land on which and from which all must live inevitably condemn the land-owning producers of wealth to deprivation. Can we think of this? It doesn't actually. While the remaining non-owning producers work and till the land, a few non-producing owners, so that such a class come into existence, would be pampered in luxury at the expense of the non-owning producers, who would be denied the right to either a part or the whole of their own produce by the non-producing owners. The former would be denied owner in part fruits of their own labor and exertion. This would result in injustice, not just on an individual, but on a social scale. There will be social injustice as a necessary result of an unjust concept of ownership. So, for the many years, let's not talk about what the meaning of ownership is. Because if it is kept in the dark, it is considered a first principle never to be discussed. And if it is unjust, whatever you do, you will have nothing but an unjust society, an unjust economy. That is how powerful ideas are. That's why we take our time to clarify. That is why when people say, let us forget philosophy and theology and worship, excuse me, you do not know what you are talking about. Kahit si mga doa, si Atenson, si Doymiano, si Manterio, pag kinausap natin maigi, kahulugan, filosofiya ang gusto mag-usapan. Kanino talaga yung tulong ito? Eh, bago-bago, pinahalat, nandiyan nila. Pag namatay ako, nandiyan pa rin. Eh, sino tulong? I was saying technique in Filipino. What we heard earlier in English. The non-producing owner will say that there will be. This is what developed in the Philippines and many countries of South America, a plutocracy and an oligarchy. When you have an unjust concept of property. True democracy on a social scale would be impossible unless a just notion of ownership were restored. Think of it. People are not discussing this concept anymore or ever. That's why only modern thinking of the establishment and the revolutionaries together, they are equally modern because they refuse to meditate, to consider in their heart, to really look deeper into the most fundamental notion of all, the notion of having in order to have prosperity of being. The non-producing owner would be able to appropriate the produce of other person's labor for merely giving them permission to work the land. The land which no one had made, which was simply there as a free gift of nature. In the end, the non-producing owners or landlords would own the labor power on the land. And of course, ownership on God, of God, on which and from which all people who must live would be a little different from owning the people themselves. Who can assail the justice and soundness of this pre-colonial concept of ownership? Did that concept change? Yes. We'll continue. With the occupation of the Philippines by Westerners, a significant change with the idea of land ownership was introduced among the various barangays of the archipelago. Heads of barangays were encouraged to individually own what traditionally were regarded as communal lands, amin, not akin, of the whole barangay, and to lay de facto claims to the lands of those indebted to him. For the first time ever, people could and would now appropriate for themselves as their exclusive property the lands that had hitherto honestly lay in their mind and in actual practice truly belonged to all. But when the Spaniards say, now you are no longer just Datu, you are Cabeza, di barangay. No? These lands in your barangay, don't do they belong? Sa amin na yun. No! You get piece of paper, draw something there, come back to me, to the alcalde, you've signed it, that will be yours. You know what it means to say yours? It is mine, not his, not hers, not theirs, not ours, but mine. Oh! So it goes back to the barangay. Do you know to whom these lands belong? What are you talking about? No, I'll tell you something. These lands belong not to me. They said the barangay. No, don't hear that. Because if you don't agree, according to this piece of paper, signed by Padre Damaso and countersigned by the alcalde, these lands are mine. Okay, they're yours. You never know now. No, if they're mine, it's joke now. But you have to give me 5% of your produce. Right? Oh, 5%. Ang pala yun. They say, why not 5%? 10%. Yun lang sa kabesa tayo. Hindi pala sufficient, it's not enough. Up to bid 50%. That's the battle. 320 revolts in 4 centuries because of that issue, because they could not accept the foreign imposed theory and practice of land ownership. Unfortunately, Spaniards understood this, so they proclaimed land reform laws in the 19th century. In the latter part of the 19th century, Spanish government tried to provide this means of registering land and obtaining titles. This was intended to rectify the sad plight of the peasantry, most of whom possessed no title to the land they occupied and who were frequently dispossessed by the principality or provincial elite, or more often than not, by the increasingly greedy Spanish friars themselves. Unfortunately, these land reform laws had the opposite effect, like all land reform laws in our history, including ones like now. The principality used the opportunity to register their lands and to claim extensive areas occupied by their smallholder neighbors. Illiterate and ignorant of the processes of the law, the peasants were helpless and were unable to protect themselves. So, that is how it was. But where did it come from? The Spanish colonial concept of ownership, which was imposed on the Philippines, had its roots in Roman law. It is thus quite useful to go back in time to the Roman period and understand what powerfully unjust concept of property these early conquerors imposed on practically the majority populace of the world. The concentration of property in private hands began very early in Rome and was indeed based on the foundational and legitimizing idea of absolute and exclusive individual ownership in land. This was the same idea which came to form the basis of the slave owning, the feudal, the capitalist, including the socialist or state capitalist economic systems successively in history. Through Spanish colonization, this idea took root in the Philippines as well. Roman law was dominated by what is commonly called the absolute conception of ownership. According to this concept, ownership is, quote, the unrestricted right to control over a physical thing, and whosoever has this right can claim the thing he owns wherever it is, and no matter who possesses it. Although there were a few restrictions in practice, philosophically and in theory, this power called dominion or proprietors was nearly unrestricted. Anyone could say anything, whether corporeal or incorporeal, such as debts and servitudes. Meum est, it is mine. I have the power over it, both to have, to hold, to use, to enjoy, to do as one please. Avere, possidere, tutti, fruit, dicere. In Roman law, property or something owned was an economic and not merely a physical conception. It denoted an element of wealth, an asset. Thus, slavery was regulated not by the law of persons, but by the use thereon, or the law of things, because slaves were an asset or economic thing. Roman law did hold the common sense ethical notion that sea and air were res communes, things common to all. It regarded the seashore as common as well, and generally no one might build a shelter there. If someone did, by government license, one could only own the shelter, not required that the shore was built. However, giving with merely reflecting the practice of land grabbing and appropriation, the patrician power holders and lawmakers of Rome did not include land from here on in their lawmaking of the res communis. The power was dictated even then. The ideological conception was in turn reinforced those power relations. What Christian philosophers later on called outright property, beginning with the land seizures by the earliest patricians, and continuing down to the latifundia, or great estates of the late Roman Empire, were securely legitimized by the Roman law conception of dominion, or ownership. Dominion was the ultimate right, the right that had no right behind it, the right that legitimized all others, while itself having no need of legitimation. At times, to be sure, it was a mere nudum use, a naked right devoid of practical effect, but it was still dominion. It was the right of using, enjoying, and abusing. Use, fluently. If this is mine, I can do whatever I want with it, I can use it, I can abuse it, I can consume it if it is good, I can dispose of it. Wala tayong pakialam because it is mine. What does it mean to say it is mine? It is not yours. It is not his. It is not her. It is exclusivist and it is absolute where it is. Okay, yes. Invite you. Listen to this carefully. Even with the revolts of the plebeians against the patricians of Rome, the concept of absolute ownership in everything, including land, did not die out. The plebeians or smallholders believed that the concept of ownership would guarantee them the little that was theirs. Okay? Sufficient protection from the clever and insatiable land seizures of the larger landholders. The plebeian movement could not understand and failed to demand reversion to very early Roman custom, which, like elsewhere, like in the Philippines, generally refused to recognize private property. Our land reform laws are all nonsense in their very conception. They are there to ensure that there will be poverty. Pakonsuelo mo, land acquisition and distribution. We have discussed that some other time. By the way, this is why I do not get invited nation will succeed only in bringing about worse social structures. In 367 BC, following a decade of violent governors, the Nicene laws were enacted, which were a kind of limited land reform. These reforms retained right of ownership as absolute in nature, although it was conceded to more people. In short, in Rome, 367 BC, they were given emancipation payments, they were given certificates like Gloma, they were given all of these so-called titles, just like the patricians had. Panulog lahat. Private occupancy of public lands, recognized to be communal as instead of local, was now limited to 500 yudzira, approximately 320 acres per investor, for investors who were developed enough to afford it. You had 20 million Filipinos with 12 million hectares of land 40 or 50 years ago. Now you have 90 million Filipinos with 12 million hectares of land at the present. Now we want to tell them we will equalize land ownership. Everybody will be absolute owner will get this land. Then we will have prosperity. Then we will have justice. I think you better come and sit down with me for some lessons in history, because you got it all wrong. The Vatican got it right. The Philippine bishops got it all wrong. Bishop Avila got it wrong. Toji got it wrong. And I say it to their face. They get it all wrong. But the Pontifical Commission on Justice and Peace, they got it right. Why? They are closer to Rome. They are closer to these studies we are talking about. In fairness to my classmate Tony and my younger brother Avila, they allow me to write about these things in Impact Magazine. Knowing full well it will not hurt anyway, so thank you very much. Given the legal legitimation behind this philosophy of ownership, it was a question of time before the great estates grew in Italy. For a time had come when in Italy, according to various accounts, the wild beasts of the coast and their lairs were taken us. But you who fight and die for Italy's power have nothing but air and light, which are about all you cannot bear of them. You roam with your wives and children without house and home. It is probably one of the least acknowledged but most amazing phenomena in all human history, that such an idea as the Roman law concept of ownership would suffuse the thinking of almost all the governments of the entire world, not for decades or centuries, but for millennia up to today. Roman law forms the basis of all the legal systems of Western Europe, England and countries of Anglo-American law, lahat, including the Philippines via Spain. Question: what happened? Christians, Jews, etc. What did they have to say on Roman law? They live in those times. Come on. They told me when they had nothing to say about it. They spoke about virginity and the Holy Trinity, etc. Are you sure? My professor said, we're not sure. But how can you say? Nobody has written about it. Sabi ko, will you allow me to do my master's dissertation on this? Well, make sure about your English, your French, and your German, but most of all your Latin, your Greek. No problem. I know my Messiah very well, so I'll get into it. So, if you want to know the result, I did publish a book on this question. It has been used a lot by the Vatican, by the bishops' conferences of America and Europe, and to an extent here. But most of all by history classes around the world. I know it, and I say that because they're giving me $500 to $1,000 a month. Over the past 30 years, a little bit of podcast of the book. Now, let me just say, the problem of injustice in ownership is, first of all, a problem of philosophy or ideology. Without a clear-cut alternative, without prevailing concept, rebellions and movements toward reforms, no matter how many how strong, ultimately fail and insurrections like we have seen in earlier Rome and latter-day Philippines will not necessarily result in genuine social revolutions. Because during the late Roman Empire, that we saw the first response of condemnation of the status quo. It came from persons now known as the first Christian philosophers, or in the discipline of theology, those called church fathers, patres. The style of their teachings is called patrology, and they're typically referred to as the patristic period, from the 1st century to the 7th. They strongly and clearly condemn the unjust Roman concept of ownership. They also proposed provisional programs for transformation of the existing practice into something new and more just. What did they do? People like Clement of Alexandria, Augustine of Hippo, Basil the Great, these guys, they went first of all to the original religiously inspired distinction between what they called ta koina in Greek. Repeat it, ta koina. Things which by their nature were common for the use of all on one hand, and on the other they called ta India. Or the things which by their nature and function could be justly owned privately, can be justly owned privately in order to be properly used. Did you get the logic? That's what the early Christian philosophers distinguished. The commons, takoina, and the India. Now the distinction was made between the right to own, are you still with me? And the right to use. The right to own is not an end in itself. Rather, it is a means toward the end of proper use. By their nature, certain things cannot be properly used unless they are somehow privately owned. Yeah, like my toothbrush. That I properly use it. This toothbrush is ours to share. Bakit hindi magagamit ng tao? Classic example. I need toothbrush. And it must be privately owned for us to have a chance to use it properly. But we do not only need toothbrushes. We need other things. I need more than toothbrush, I need air. Because, I can live all my life without a toothbrush. Although my neighbor will not be able to live for 5 minutes if I don't have a toothbrush. But I cannot live for 3 minutes without air. Yes, air for our lungs. So although we need air more than we need toothbrush, who would think of owning air in order to use it? In the Philippines, a few decades back, it said, 20 million people, 12 million hectares para bulan. Ngayon, now, the Lord of creation is allowing the creation of more people. But has seemingly stopped creation of new lands. In such a society, therefore, what would be just with regard to the ownership of land? If land ownership is merely a means to the proper use of land, what land use and land ownership programs would be realistic enough to follow a moral philosophy of having? Clearly, the question is crucial if one expects to have peace and prosperity of being. A given community being agreed among themselves, for instance, that the purposes of land are food security for all, decent habitats for all, and an ecologically harmonious economic regime accountable. The absolutist exclusivist program of national dominion must be relativized and made inclusive with regard particularly to things of nature's bounty, things which by their nature are clearly made reusable. In the view of early social philosophy reacting to the Roman concept, dominion or absolute ownership belongs, ito lang, Christian philosophers talking, to the one absolute owner of all creation. In this view, we do not even own ourselves, absolutely speaking. Hence, we cannot just do whatever we want with ourselves because we only own ourselves, not absolutely, but relatively to the ends of human life on earth. The reason why suicide is considered sinful and illegal is because we are not absolute owners even of our own self. Be careful, please. Do not commit suicide because you will be put in prison. That will be illegal. Thus, the moral philosophical view was advanced that human ownership of anything at all must be regarded in the nature of stewardship. This was introduced now in the Judeo-Christian tradition, not as the Roman concept in the nature of an absolute and exclusivist dominion. And a steward versus a dominus, or absolute owner, is indeed one who has rights and powers over property, but not absolutely. Not in any way he wants, but merely according to the will of the real or absolute owner of all things. Early Christians would challenge people to see that the Roman law idea of absolute and exclusivist ownership was a direct affront to the Christian faith view, which is also the perspective of all the major living faiths, that God alone is absolute, and that God alone has absolute dominion, God alone being absolute dominus of all things. The Herculean task of Christian thought was to confront the established ownership concept and stand it on its head. This is what the great founders of Western civilization did. Their names are Ambrose of Milan, Augustine of Hippo, these people. This is what they were writing about. These writings of theirs were kept secret. They were not on their own. They were not translated from Latin and Greek. From being an instrument of exclusion and separation, they will now want to become one of inclusion and community building. Instead of an unlimited and absolute power, it was to be a limited one, related to genuine human values. Instead of being considered an end in itself, it was to be considered a means to certain ends. Tell me that. Let me give you some quotations. What these people actually said. John Chrysostom, born 344 AD, lived in Constantinople. Now, Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia. He used to preach there. Those of you who have been to Istanbul. When you go there next time, look again. It's not Muslim. But then, before you go with David, this early Christian philosopher thought, he would ask this question. He says, tell me, how did you become rich? From whom did you receive that large testimony? And from whom did you receive it who transmitted it to you? The origin and root of it must have been injustice. Why? Because God in the beginning did not make one man rich and another poor. He left the earth free to all alike. Why then it is common? Have you so many acres of land? While your neighbor has not a portion of it. Is this not an evil that you alone should enjoy what is common? You want to calculate for early market, you know something like that. Bishop the Great, born 330 AD, living in Cappadocia. Cappadocia is in Turkey. Took the same position. I thought, do you think that you, who have taken everything into the unlimited compassion of others, thereby depriving so many others, have done injury to no one? Who is avaricious? One who is not content with those things which are species. With that case, are you not? You who make your own the things which you have received to distribute, that bread which you keep belongs to the hungry, that clothes which you preserve in your wardrobe to the naked, that gold which you have hidden in the ground to the needy. Because we know that if people were left to believe that riches were a gift of destiny, both rich and poor, would intellectually accept the status quo and regard the unjust structures which they have inherited, which were maintained to devise their own law concept as fine. But Christian law ignored the legality. It proposed a new way of looking at things as they were, from the point of view of things as they ought to be. So they regarded individual ownership of the commons as proper. That's regarded use. They were not trying to money. To the early Christian philosophers, the relationship between wealth and poverty was most concrete. It was the relationship between the wealthy and the poor. This unbalanced and unjust relationship was maintained by what Christian college process and essentially unjust concept and practice, the so-called right to and de facto appropriation of the koina by privileged few. This is what Chrysostom said when I sermons. If you are rich, reflect that you shall be giving an account, not only of your expenditures, but also how you acquired your property. Whether you gathered money by just labor or by robbery and others. Basically, to put out the right of the person in right of the labor. Then he asked the Lord, by what right they exercise ownership over their past estates? Oh, which states, tell me, are yours? Whence have you brought them into being? Whatever you have produced or brought into being may just be yours. However, it is land that has made the landlords rich, and the land is not something they have brought into being. They have merely gotten there first, so to speak. This is what he says further, and I quote again from Avila. You are like one occupying a place in a theater, who should prohibit others from entering, treating that as one's own, which was designed for the common use. If each one will take that which is sufficient for one's needs, leaving what is in his head to those in distress, no one will be rich, no one poor. Did you not come naked from the womb? Will you not return naked into the earth? So basically, distinguish the idea, one's own and takoina, common goods. As did Clement of Alexandria, born 150 AD, who lived in northern Egypt, he pointed out much earlier that food, clothing, and shelter-producing resources are there as God's gifts for all, and that their finance should therefore be brought into the common stock for those in need. No one made these resources, he said. They have been provided by God for people of all, and then they lie at hand and are put at our disposal as a sort of material and as instruments to be well used. Ambrose of Milan fulminated from the pulpit, the story of ancestors, he said, is old in time, but daily in practice. For who of the rich does not daily covet the goods of others? Mere ownership of the land puts them in unjust possession of others' property. Why do you cast out the fellow sharers of nature and claim it all for yourselves? He said, the earth was made in common for all. Why do you allocate to yourselves your exclusive right to the soil? And then this is again. God generously gives all things that are much more necessary than money, such as air, water, fire, the sun, all such things, that we may live securely. The causes of life are given to us in common. Christians view the fact that the majority of the population that live securely is due to their being deprived the causes of life, what nature's boundary natures God has given for the use of all. Augustine the people said, you have a common universe with the rich. You do have a common sky, a common light. Have you brought along anything here? No, not even you rich people have brought anything. You found everything here. With the poor, you were born naked. Elsewhere, because the Lord God gives the world to the poor as well as to the rich. Will the rich person have two stomachs to fill because of being rich? This goes on and on. They talk about the twin goals of ownership, autarkia and koinonia. Autarkia meant self-sufficiency and self-reliance, like our ancestor Pagsasarili, which kept one from being a perpetual burden to others. By it, one achieved a degree of self-determination. One became relatively self-insured, so to speak, and thereby morally independent, so as to be free for service to others. Autarkia denoted a standard of living that enabled one to live a life consonant with human beings. Autarkia implied ownership of property be subordinated to use and be for the sake not of holding or keeping or showing off, but for use. Now, the purpose of property was not only to achieve autarkia, however, but also to attain what they call koinonia, communion. Our ancestral value called pagsasama-sama, the equal fellowship that abolishes the differentiation between the spiritual and luxury and the many who live in poverty. The early social philosophers considered the individual person essentially social. It is God Himself, says Clement, who has brought our race to a koinonia by sharing Himself first of all, and by sending His word all alike, and by making all things for all. Augustine people said, the wealthy should certainly not be wealthy at the expense of others being poor. In his view, nothing could be more unjust, divisive, and thus destructive of koinonia than that. They rejected the Roman concept because that philosophy essentially attacked the social nature of the human being and the personalist character of social relations. They advance the view that material things are essentially a means of fostering living community or koinonia of things themselves instead of imposing a personal character and things themselves on social relations. They had no preference for private ownership, and they considered private ownership as idolatry. This is very funny, because later, centuries later, those who advocated no private ownership were called atheists, atheistic socialists. In the early Christian centuries, it was the opposite. It was private ownership which was atheistic or idolatrous. The early Christian philosophers never forgot the perfect disjunction that Jesus had set before His own followers. You cannot give yourself to God and money. St. Luke. Property was a false god. Property and money had become an object of worship, enslaving both the possessor and the dispossessed. The hoarding of wealth had become a passion that could not be satisfied, and an unending process that always demanded more after each new acquisition. The hoarder was identified by these early Christian philosophers as the land grabber, the usurer, the political power holder, and accused of sacrificing both nature and people on the altar of this newly developed God, money and its veritable religion, the ideology and practice of absolute ownership. They also never discussed the so-called just compensation to expropriated landlords. There's nothing to be compensated. It was a matter of simple justice. And I quote, not from your own do you bestow on the poor man, said Ambrose, but to make return from what is his. For what has been given as common for the use of all, you appropriate yourself alone. The earth belongs to all, not to the rich. Therefore, you are paying a debt. In all our laws, it is there. Just compensation. So, you want to take over the visita? Let me tell you very fast what is going to be the take over the visita? Just like any other VOS, will tell you over to sell? What will happen? Who will get rich? Immediately. The Guwapos will be 25 billion pesos rich. Because the people of the Philippines, through their stupid government, will have to put out that kind of money according to the laws of the Philippines. Did you get it? Yes. That is exactly what this way of looking at the land. Is there any way? Few more pages, so let me just do this very fast to introduce the next topic. There is. The new way is we must seriously take the idea of economics, seriously consider all the people of the given community as owners. So that anyone who uses anything of the commons must pay rent. To whom? To everybody else. That is the land value taxation of petroleum now. When I introduced this in 1986, before the committee of Congressman Gallego in the House and the committee of San Alvarez and Bolsafino in the Senate, this charter is too radical. Secondly, it is a record that you were the one who led all the demonstrations for 2844 and for the good of the reforms. And hindi object ko pala ulang demonyo dalawang pagbigo, PD27. I said, I object it. But true, I do not deny that I have bring about change in the land authority to the DAR. But now, it's a different thing. If we continue in the DAR and the land acquisition program, we will have the biggest land scam in the history of this country by now. The result, and I hate to the right, is all those who struggle from Central Luzon and Southern Tagalog for land reform are not only without land reform, they are without land. They are without land. Why? Wrong concept. Pag mali ang pag-iisip, hindi mali na labas. That's why I like reviewing the Christian social issues and going to Deuteronomy and go to Theology. These people spend a lot of time praying and thinking on these elementary matters. Down the line. Let that immediate reaction by a few now turn it into a big movement. What a simple money passus extravia great strife. Wala sa tao. Mali na pag-iisip. Hindi na katuloy na katuloy. Ang mas problematic ay walang gabot sa mali. Walang gabot sa mali. Sa kulang na pag-iisip. That's why I take my time, I beg your forgiveness in academic institutions to beg your indulgence to try to invite you to have change makers, especially change agents, to finally get a significant enough sector of Philippine society to do the hardest thing to do in the world. What is the hardest thing to do in the world? To think. Kulang. Para tayo kumilos, lalo lang tingin. Gusto lang tayo. Kung mapasama ko lang sa amin, ang lumit ng buhay. Pag masukong tayo, divide mo ka na. Well, good for them. Tama kami. Pero mas importante, una sa lahat, yung tamang pag-iisip sa mga pag-iisip. So, that was proposed, land value taxation. In earlier times, that could even have resulted in fewer taxes. You are going to tax improvements on the land. So the incentive to make improvements on the land. Kaya nawawala yung urban life in the cities of the world that apply land value taxation. No more urban life. The most successful reform on planet Earth is land value taxation. In Taiwan, they use that to an extent. Who are the teachers in the land reform training institute in Taiwan? 6 Tokeros. You see? Jeremias Multimayo. And myself, sometimes alive, sometimes dead. But thank you very much. I'll be around for you.
Student fact and ours last speaker is actually, we're lucky to have somebody from the Jubilee Foundation. I would like to call Pastor Jay to introduce that person who came all the way from Korea to just give us an idea of what that message is all about.
Good evening, everybody. I know that we are in a hurry, but I would like to ask Asi to give a little more grace time. Although the class begins at 5:30, we have one more speaker.
So we're just taking a
Dr. Joe is how can I describe him? I'll make it very short. During the talk, in few days, I concluded that he is a man of integrity. It means that once he found the truth in net taxation, that can make all people live peaceful and abundant life and equal life. He committed himself to that movement. He studied urban and regional planning in Seoul National University and got master's degree there. And after that, he went to China, Remain University, and started land policy there. He got a PhD there. And he is presently research director for Land and Housing Center in Institute of Land and Liberty. He is here with Peter Go, the executive secretary of the Jubilee and Land Justice Association in Korea. He is there.
Thank you. I'd like to say about the reasons why there's poverty in our societies, including Philippines, and what's the answer for this poverty. And there is a lot of reasons for poverty, especially personal reasons and natural disasters or poor conditions, and structural reasons. And about social poverty, Karl Marx said the monopoly of capital is the main reason for poverty. So he answered that to solve this problem, all the land and capital should be socialized. But as you know, as was proven in the socialized countries, the socialization of capital is not just itself and impedes the incentives for economic activity. So socialized countries, including China, has been changed into a capitalized society. So his answer was excessive to solve the poverty. And Theology he's an economist at the time of Karl Marx of America. He said that monopolistic private land ownership is the real reason for poverty. So he answered that monopolistic private land ownership is the real reason for poverty. And he noticed poverty in progress at New York, and moreover, progress itself made poverty more severe. And also I saw that poverty in Philippines, because poverty in Philippines is in fertility. There's a lot of natural resources, there are a lot of land, but you can see poverty in Philippines. So it's the same between New York and Philippines, I think. So let's go to the answer for Theology, land taxation. Another thing was, I think, already explained specifically. First of all, Theologists say that the reason for property is the privatization of land rent. The concept of rent already Charles Avila already explained specifically. But I'd like to say something about the rent concept of land. And in agricultural land, the reason for rent is natural fertility. But in urban land, the reason for happening of rent is not personal but social reasons, because, as you know, the increase of people and conglomeration into the city and the development of economy and science, supply of public services and land speculation make land rent happens and increase in urban land. But as I said, these reasons explains the social reasons, not the personal reasons. So land happens and increased by through social reasons. So the land rent in our land should be owned by community, by ours. So Theology said that the true remedy for selling property in urban land and in our agricultural area is the transformation of private ownership of land to a common ownership. Nothing else will go to the cause of the evil, and nothing else is there. The society is a whole. So he said that this is the only and ultimate way to serve the property in our society. But yes. And there are some countries, according to the theory of Theology, implement this theory. This theory is public land leasing system. Finland, do you know Finland? I think you know Finland. This country is almost the best country in our world. And Canada and Hong Kong, China have been applying the public land leasing system. And Theology said that there is an applied remedy for private land ownership society. I do not propose either to purchase or to confiscate private property in land. The first would be unjust. The second is this. Let the individuals who now own it still retain, if they want to, possession of what they are pleased to call their land. Let them continue to call it their land. Let them buy and sell, and bequeath and divide it. We may safely leave them the share if we take the command. It is not necessary to confiscate land. It is only necessary to confiscate rent. So this picture shows the big differences between today's taxation system and LVT system. In the capitalist societies, all of the countries are implementing this system, tax system. There are three production factors: land, labor, and capital. So economic wealth should be distributed to to the landowner and the labor and the capitalist. To the landowner, the land rent should be distributed, and wages to the labor, interest to the capitalist. So, in most capitalist societies implementing this system, That means all three factors, they tax on all three factors. But as I said earlier, land rents have been happened and increased by social reasons. So land rent should be owned by society, community. But labor and capital have their whole portion of wealth. So earlier we said that land rent should be taxed perfectly, almost 100% of land rent. And also, wages and interest should be owned by laborers and capitalists by almost 100%. So, if our tax system shift from this to LBT system, then land rent will be owned by community, and the labor will own almost all the wages from their labor. So their real wage will increase according to the tax shift. This is the main point of LBT system. And this LBT, land value taxation system, is come up to Adam Smith for tax principles completely. LBT is light on production, and it is easy and cheap to collect, and fall directly upon the ultimate payers, the landowners. And third, it is certain, and the fourth is equal to the landowner according to their sphere. And Milton Friedman is a neo-economist. He admits that land value tax is the least bad tax. So there are a lot of LBT effects concerning property and economic variables. This is a theoretical explanation. I would like to go to the two cases to explain the effects of LBT system. I prepared two cases. First of all, the case of Taiwan, and the next is the case of Denmark. The case of Taiwan shows the importance of leader. Sun Yan, he is the Chinese father of China. He led the Chinese Revolution in 1911 and established a democratic country 100 years ago. He was impressed from Theology, whom I already said, and suggested that land reform policy in China in mainland, which was enacted in Taiwan. Sun Yan, he already proclaimed to implement these policies in mainland, but according to the failure in mainland, Zhang Geisha, who was the successor of Sun Yat-sen, he was failing in gaining the political power in mainland. He was expelled to Taiwan land, and he implemented his policy in Taiwan. After he was expelled to the Taiwan, he specified LBT system in Taiwan's constitution. I don't know if you can understand the Taiwan Chinese character, but this means equal land rights. And in Article 142, they specify this meaning, this concept in their Taiwan's constitution. And they successfully implemented in agricultural land reform the principle of land to the tiller. This is the outcome of success in agricultural land. Before the reform, the ratio of peasants' land was 41%, but after reform, the ratio changed to 15.2%. There is a big change. And then also there was a successful urban land reform. He enacted the statute for equalization of land rights in urban areas in 1954. And he implemented two taxes. One is land value tax, and another is land value increment tax. He enacted these two taxes in urban land, and the sum of two taxes was 60% of total revenue in 1991. This was a big volume of total revenue. And the next case is the Denmark. This case shows the importance of democracy and recognition of the people. There are also big influences on Denmark by Theology. So some people who was impressed by Theology constructed Danish Theology Union in 1902. And they formed Justice Party. This is the actual political party. The platform of Justice Party were three. First, confiscation of all land grants that society has produced through LVT. Two, using income from LVT for revenue. Three, abolishment of income tax and capital tax. In 1947, acquisition of political power through the coalition of two parties. This government was called Ground Youth Government, but they gained political power just 4 years, and there was big changes in their economic level of economic conditions. First of all, the start of land speculation and economic revival and surplus balance in international trade, the decrease of government's debt, and the increase of economic growth by 42%. And the real wages increased by 4 times more than inflation rate. I prepared statistics to explain this success. This is before 4 years before this government, Ground Youth Government, and this is Ground Youth Government. 4 years. For 4 years, there was a big change in 4 items, 4 factors, and also after this Ground Youth Government, they failed in gaining political power, but the influences still existed after the 4 years, still continued, as you see like this. So statistically, there was a big change between before the government and after the government. So you can see that if one country successfully implements this admin system in the nationwide, there should be a sufficient and significant changes in nationwide. And finally, I'd like to introduce some outstanding persons who dedicated their lives to land justice. He is the Theology. He wrote Progress and Poverty, and he affected around the world. And this is Lev Tolstoy. He also was impressed by Theology and distributed his vast land to pigeons free of charge. And his novel researched the slavery of our times, including his thoughts. And soon one Chinese father, as I said already, he led the Chinese Revolution and established the democratic Chinese government. He was impressed from Theology in London, and his specific land policy was implemented in Taiwan, as I said. And he is Vinoba Bhave from India. He persuaded the rich person to distribute their land to the peasants walking around the whole country for 20 years. And he's a Korean. He was the president of a provisional government in time of Japanese imperialism. He wanted to establish equal land right in the liberated Korea, but he was assassinated. And his name is Choi Chul-sung, a Korean person. His nickname is a barefoot angel. You can see he's barefoot. He's an independent activist with King Gu. He distributed his 10,000 of land to the homeless free of charge and died with barefoot. He answered he would wear shoes in time of our reunification between South Korea and North Korea. He's also a Christian. And finally, Ruben Architray III. He was there 2002. He was an American missionary to South Korea. He established Jesus Army in Tebet Mountain. He is the spiritual father for South Korea and land justice movement. He proclaimed the land justice to the time of death. This is a real story. And he said, toward Philippines land policy. Land reform will be the decisive factor in the Philippines' future. He said this in his book. So, and finally, thank you. No land, no liberty. Yes.